I'm Amy Medford. Welcome to For Art's Sake. Today we have the pleasure of speaking to artist Bernarda Bryson Shahn. Ms. Bryson Shahn just received an honorary PhD in fine art from Ohio University. She's currently completing a book on Ben Shahn drawings, and her paintings can be seen at the Midtown Payson Galleries in New York City. Currently, she's in an exhibition at the Monmouth Museum in Lincroft, New Jersey. Welcome. Bernarda, you started as a painter, then a printmaker, illustrator, and now again a painter. What a remarkable journey. How did it begin?
Well, it began when I was probably 4 or 5 years old and started drawing on the walls with anything at hand. But when I drew always, and I wrote always. Both my parents were in that kind of, my mother was a college professor, my father was a newspaper editor, owner, and they were very much involved in the language, so that I wrote a great deal. And, but I'd always drew. And when I was 11, my mother thought things had gone far enough. So she bought canvas and stretchers and showed me how to stretch a canvas. And I started making probably really awful paintings. But so I did that kind of thing. And in college, I was always, I studied art. Of course, I studied art before I went to college. In the boarding school where I was, the Columbus School for Girls, we had a wonderful art teacher, Mrs. Darby, who had traveled all over the world and had seen everything. And so it was a great pleasure to study art with her, because I was in love with painting anyway. That was a boarding school that was shaped for people who were using a lot of imagination and were going to do things that were not quite the regular thing for nice ladies to do. And lots of people, a lot of my classmates went on to do very interesting things. Some of them wrote and so on and so forth. But I had very bad experiences in the first place. When I was, well, the first thing that happened to me was awful. When I was in the 3rd grade, I don't know what was happening to me, but the teacher called on me it was a math class, and she called on me for an answer, and I wasn't even listening. I didn't know what she was talking about. So I just sat there with my mouth open, and she started yelling at me. And she said, "Why don't you answer me?" Well, I didn't know why I didn't. I didn't know why I didn't answer her. So she kept on yelling, "Why didn't I answer her?" She went out and got the principal.
Oh, you're kidding.
And the principal came back and she spread my hand down like this and slapped my hand with a ruler and said, you will not answer your teacher."
Oh, no wonder your parents didn't force you to go to school.
Well, the school was down at the end of our street, and I was just, when we got out, I was just, went home in a kind of a daze. And as soon as our house got into sight, this awful sob came out of me. I began to cry like wild. My father wouldn't let me go back. And he was very nice. He said, "Whenever you feel like going back, you can," and so on and so forth. And then we were getting ready to go to California, so we were out of school. My mother was being a college professor, was very well equipped to teach us. So she said she would do the teaching. But she didn't bother very much. So, so what we did, we were in Yuma, Arizona. She had to be there for her health. We were at Phoenix. We were in Phoenix, and we studied Latin derivatives and took toe dancing.
Oh, wonderful!
that consisted of my education for a couple of years. No, for a year, and then we came back and we lived in the country. And I didn't go to school there. My sister though did. My sister always went to school. But I like to, we had ponies and horses. I loved to ride, and I used to just ride through the hills and, but it is a strange thing that my parents said, they didn't insist that I go to school. I tried a few times. I went to a country school for a couple of weeks and things like that, but they had the idea that I didn't fit in very well in school, and they didn't force it. But then when I was about 13, my mother put her foot down and said, "I have to go to school." Well, at first, when I told her I went to a Catholic school, I ran away from that. I really did.
Oh, that was a wonderful story.
Oh, that was a story, yeah. Then I went to the Columbus School for Girls, which was very sophisticated, and the people were funny. And you know, when I did crazy things, they kind of liked it. So I was graduated, believe it or not, from that one.
We had discussed this before, I was saying that you started your career in Ohio at the Ohio State Journal, but you had told me that there were other jobs that you had had prior to that,
Yeah.
which I would like to hear more about again. But then you moved to New York City. And one of the things that I wanted to focus in on is during that period you did quite a bit of socially motivated work, and you were involved in the Work Projects Administration, the WPA. Would you tell us what led to your involvement in these projects?
Well, I could tell, I wasn't involved it wasn't the WPA, it was the PWAP, which was part of the same program.
Okay.
But that was all in New York. Before I went to New York, I was working on the Ohio State Journal, as you mentioned, and I was writing the art things. And among the other things, the other people whom I wrote about, you know, every show that came to town, naturally, a show came from the Modern Museum, and Ben's painting of Sacco and Vanzetti was in that show. And I was so impressed with it because I had written about a lot of artists who did, you know, sort of social, sort of moralistic type themes, but they were lousy artists. No, I mean, I don't mean that they were lousy artists. I mean that it didn't come through as art. It came through as the idea that they had.
Right.
And so I had written about it, and I was very impressed with that. Then there was the big Rivera fracas, and it was really almost over at the time but there was still a lot of talk about it, when I said to my editor, why don't I go over to New York and interview Rivera? And he said, that's a good idea. So I went, and Rivera asked this very handsome gent to come and help him translate, who was his assistant. That was Ben. So as you can well imagine, I was much more delighted to meet Ben in a way than I was Rivera, although I loved Rivera. He was great. But so I told Ben that I had written about him, and we had a nice talk, and I went back to Columbus and forgot all about it. But in less than a year, I decided that New York is pretty interesting, and maybe I'll switch my activities to New York, so I did. I think you asked about
yes,
about you know, the so-called social activities.
Yes, and I refer to it that way because I'd like you to discuss it, but that was, I felt, a way to lead into it.
Well, the first night I was in New York, I was staying with an editor friend of mine, Lucy Temkin, and Lucy said, you know, there's a meeting of unemployed artists down in the Church of All Nations on 2nd Avenue. I bet you'd be interested in it. And I said, I certainly would. How do I get there? so Lucy took me down and left me at the door. Maybe she stayed, I don't know. But it was very interesting. And so, of course, in my very bad habit, I shot my mouth off, so to speak. And so after I talked a little bit. But after a while, so they were going to nominate officers, and somebody nominated me to be secretary of the organization, and I quickly said, I don't even know my way around New York. But they voted for me, and I became secretary of the organization.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So we had a lot of fun, and we decided we'd find a headquarters, and we found this battered old office building on 17th Street, and we washed the windows and fixed it all up and had a headquarters. And then there was a big discussion, should we be a guild, should we be a union, should we be this? And unions were very much in the ascendancy at that point. I was much for the union, and we voted, and we became the Artists' Union.
Wonderful.
So then we got a bigger headquarters. Everybody joined the union. So, you know, the artists who were conspicuous in New York were the ones that didn't belong to the union. Gorky belonged to it, Stuart Davis belonged to it, well, Gorky wasn't active, Stuart was very active. Ben belonged to it, almost anybody you could mention. It has a kind of an interesting history. The Depression, as you know, was very deep by that time. This was, I think that was about 1934, and 33 or 34. And a group of wealthy New York art lovers had formed something called the Committee of 100, or the Gibson Committee. And they were finding jobs for artists to do, some very funny jobs, but you know, it was giving them a little money. And so out of that, the artists who were employed on that kind of a project started the Unemployed Artists Organization, and then a lot of other unemployed artists, that is, all artists,
Found work.
Anyway, a lot of artists joined, and it became very big.
That's
when we became a union,
Mm-hmm.
it got pretty controversial. I'll tell you one of the things that we did. You see, the habit, I mean, not the practice, I would call it, of both the Whitney Gallery, which was, Whitney was administering the PWAP projects, Public Works of Art project, they were called Treasury,
Mm-hmm.
and the College Art Association, they were administering some others. So they were favoring gallery artists,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, a gallery would tell them this artist or that artist. So the gallery artists were getting conspicuous preference, and a lot of very good artists didn't have galleries, and a lot of gallery artists thought that other artists should be equally favored. So we had. So we demonstrated in front of Whitney and various other places. We had a couple of marches and so on. And everybody had a whole lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
But well, we shouldn't put it that way because we were very serious.
Oh, it was very
but we
serious.
made wonderful. I remember Byron Brown made a big logo for us of a hand with a, you know, with a brush and so on. The police would, a couple of times the police went after us. Once, I remember we were going to march from Washington Square to the Whitney, which is right around the corner, you know. And so the police broke us up and said we couldn't do it. So we had already planned this in advance, and so we broke up into twos, and we strolled around two by two, and then we all met again in front of the Whitney. But I'll tell you a very funny thing. See, by that time I was a perfectly professional newspaper woman, and I'd come from a newspaper, my father was an editor. So I would call the Tribune and say, this is Bernarda Bryson speaking, there's a big demonstration in front of the Whitney Gallery, and I would tell what the issues were and so on and so forth. Sometimes I would say, maybe you ought to send a photographer. Sometimes they did. I called the Times. The Times only responded once. But the Tribune was, I love the Tribune. They always send somebody down. Then we'd call the Post and so on. So this was simply because I knew that those papers were so big that they wouldn't know the name of one reporter from another. And if you did it in a professional way, why, you were doing them a favor, as well as yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But it was lots of fun. And I hate to say that because people were in very bad, people were having a lot of trouble.
It was a difficult time.
It was a terrible time. Yeah. But we were helping people in lots of ways. There was a wonderful occasion in which I think it wasn't a Hearns department store. It was another one on 14th Street though. There was a strike of the workers in that store, and so the artists decided that they would go picket with the workers from that department store, and they did, and they were arrested. And they were booked, I think, at the 23rd Street station. So, of course, they had to give their names. Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse. Oh,
you're kidding. What a remarkable roster.
The entire roster of French art, the Curico, everybody's on the books.
Oh, my God.
And it was I unfortunately missed that demonstration, but I heard about it. I thought it was wonderful.
Well, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your work now. You were very successful as an illustrator for major publications, and Russell Lines described you as the most accomplished illustrator in the business. How did this affect your development as an artist?
Oh, it was very flattering. I didn't remember that.
I would imagine, yeah.
No, I love to draw, and there was a time when I was living here. I had 3 small children, and I had lost contact with the living world, to my mind, and so I decided that I would like to draw for a magazine. I liked Harper's. I wrote a letter. I used my own name. I didn't use Ben's name, and told just to Russell, whom I didn't know, and said that I liked the magazine, and I saw that they used drawings and so on and so forth. So I got a very funny letter from him saying that he was glad that Harper's was a magazine to which I could subscribe.
Oh, wonderful.
And so he said to bring in some drawings. So I didn't mount them or anything. I just tossed some drawings in an envelope and went in. And so Russell said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I want to give you a story, and you make whatever drawings you want for it. if I like them, I'll take them. If I don't, I won't. Is that all right with you? And I said, that's fine. Well, he did like them, and he took them. And from that time on, I worked for Harper's. You know, I used to work for them almost every month for what, 20 or 30 years, I don't know how. But when I began to work for Harper's, then the next one was the Scientific American, and I loved working for them. I read every article, did research on every one of them, and then I worked for Fortune, and it was great fun to work for Fortune. So those three were steady. And so then I worked for, you know, for other magazines. I worked for 17 and things of that sort. And I enjoyed it very, very much.
That sounds wonderful.
So I did that for many years.
I know, and throughout all of this, you also continued to write. That was also a passion of yours. Yeah, and you have written and illustrated a number of books. Would you tell us a little more about some of them?
Well, the first book, I had been doing a lot of illustrating, and I don't know why I did the St. Nicholas book. I guess just because I was amused to discover that St. Nicholas really was a person. But I came across the 20 miracles that he's supposed to have performed, and they were very miraculous miracles. So I decided that would make a pretty good book. So I did the book. Incidentally, a Byzantine scholar is now in Antalya, which is that part of, which is in a very ancient part of Turkey, but a very big Byzantine part of Turkey also. And he was using my book.
Was he really?
I'm exaggerating. He told me that my book was just amazingly Byzantine to his mind. Well, of course, I wanted it to be Byzantine, and so that was delightful to do, and it was published by Little Brown, and then the next book I did. I think the next one was Gilgamesh, and this is a legend I had known for many, many years. And I had known every recension of it and done enormous research on it, just because I was so fascinated. This very early Sumerian civilization was so highly developed and could tell so fresh a story as this, in which people defied the gods and things of that sort. So I really loved doing it, and it was published by Holt, Reinhardt and Winston. And they did a beautiful job of the illustrations. I mean, I did a beautiful job of the illustrations.
You were the one who did the illustrations.
They reproduced them very well. But this time I was illustrating a lot of books, and I had just done a Wuthering Heights, which I had a story that I had always loved.
Yes.
And it was a big job though. And after I did all the drawings for Wuthering Heights, I said, why don't you do something really nutty, something that isn't somebody else's writing? So I did in verse something that I called the Zoo of Zeus, which was all the creatures, you know, of Greek mythology, and it's a very nice book. And I took that to Dick Grossman, who was a publisher, and he had it reproduced in Italy, beautifully reproduced. But then it had a very unfortunate thing happen. Oh. Dick was in love with a young lady, and the shipment came, and they had a place right on the corner of Gramercy Square, and the shipment came, and he put it in a place in this building where you know, where his place was. So he went off to seek for Joe, and the roof leaked.
Oh no!
So most of the shipment was destroyed, but a lot of them were circulated. Every once in a while, one turns around.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But I love the book. It's really nice. Then after Ben died, I had written a lot about Ben for various. I did one for Image, and I've written for Graphics a couple of times, and Nouvelle Observateur in France and so on. And after he died, I decided. People were writing the wrong things about him and not understanding. So, and then Harry Abrams called me and asked me to come in to lunch. And he asked me if I would write a book about Ben, and I said, I really want to. I'd like to very much. So I went to the Canary Islands. I wrote the whole thing there and came back and edited it down. But I also designed it. But, you know, I wouldn't take the...
that book I've seen. No, it's a beautiful
I wouldn't
take
have the effrontery, put it that, to try to design a book so far as the type counting and shaping things and getting them all straight and so on is concerned. but there was a wonderful, wonderful editor named Nate Chang, you know, graphics editor at Abrams. So I did the designing of where I wanted things to be, and Nate did the physical thing of putting them together. And I must say it came off just beautifully, and it was a very nice book.
It is.
And the last one, you know, I've just finished doing a book on Ben's drawings, and I designed that first, and I'm drawing, but I've finished drawing.
So you continue doing all of this alongside now with your painting. And I do want to discuss that, and I want to talk about that. But I also, well, why don't we focus on that? I'd like to talk about Veblen College also, because it's just so fascinating about all the individuals who participated in the idea stage of that.
Yes.
But I really do want to talk about your painting. And I know that you focused on your painting again in the 70s, and your painting style is very different in style and subject matter from your printmaking. And I'm curious to know what made you focus your creative expression.
But I don't think that I don't think it is different in style. Okay. I think this, you know, I still carry in my conscience the heavy teaching of Marie-Louise Stahl that you really have to draw and you really have to know what you're doing. And all my drawings are very much in drawing, and so are my paintings.
So essentially.
So they are the same. But my drawings also had a touch of what people call surrealism, and I think it does have a touch of surrealism.
Yeah, that's
but my drawings always had that quality also.
Right. I was going that actually that I do see that in your work. But I think the thing that I was focusing in on is in many of your paintings now you're using inanimate or anonymous objects like the artist's mannequin and the draped figure. And I guess that's, to me, what the biggest difference is.
Well, I could tell you some of the genesis of that.
Please.
A very interesting thing. You know, all the time when I was drawing and Ben was painting and so on, I wasn't painting. I wasn't jealous at all, but I knew I was going to paint someday again. And I would think of things I wanted to paint. After Ben had died, I didn't, you know, I did the book and I didn't do anything for a while, and I bought a press and did some prints. And I was in the studio one day, and there was a mounted panel, and I just picked up some paints and started painting. And then I said to myself, you know, which way do you want to go? Because I was extremely familiar with you know, all the different directions in art, of the surrealism and of abstract art and so on. I realized the virtues of abstract art, that you're totally free to use your materials whichever way you want to. However, that's where it stops. You can't say, it has no human connection. And I have too much storage of stories in me, and too much storage of interest and real excitement about people and about ideas. And so I couldn't go in that direction. Well, the first ones that I did were the draped figures. And the first one I did happened in a very peculiar way. Somebody had put one of those little sculptures that the Metropolitan Museum discarded as being non-genuine. They were given around to the art schools, and so somebody had kindly put one in my studio in Maine. And I hated the thing, and it was stone. I couldn't move it. So, so my son-in-law, Roy Slam at that time, Roy said, "Why don't you throw a sheet over it?" I went in and threw a sheet over it, and I said, "Wow," because that was going to be a model. So when I was painting it, the idea was going through my head that what I'm really doing is searching, and and so I thought it was the artist searching for himself, he'll never really know who he is, but where you find yourself is in painting.
You have some connections with the Skowhegan School in Maine. How did that come about?
Well, it's called, and I like this,
yes,
the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture.
Thank you.
And it is a very, very interesting art school that is run entirely by artists, supplied and supported by enthusiastic trustees. And my connection began with Ben, because Ben had done fresco, and they wanted to specialize in fresco, particularly at Skowhegan. This was to be an art school, very largely, I want to direct myself, very largely for pretty well-developed young artists. And it's largely scholarship also. But they wanted Ben to be there, you know, to help them direct about about fresco. Now, Henry Varnum Poor was one person who was there, Annie Poor, and so we went there for many years. At first, we used to just visit Bill Cummings, on whose place the whole school was started. And then I found a house near the school, and I found this house for $2,100, and I was going to buy it. And Bill and Ben said, "Oh, no, 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 you don't want to do that. You'll spend your life fixing that house up. Oh, no, no, don't do it." And they were building a house. So this house is very charming. It's very modern that they designed, and built with 2 studios, but only 1 bedroom, because Bill said if you have more than 1 bedroom, it's going to be full all the time, and so on and so forth. So after Ben died, they wanted me to continue to be a governor there, which I am. I love the school dearly, and each year we have a new crop of absolutely wonderful artists, and every experiment under the sun that has ever been thought of has been tried up there. You see some exciting, wonderful work. I would like to just tell maybe one piece, for instance.
Please.
All right, I will. I think it was summer before last, and I remember lots of pieces, but this one I will never forget. A young, I think she was from one of the, she was a Latin student. She made casts of parts of bodies, an arm, part of a face, a head, and so on and so forth. She buried them in mud so that they looked as though they were just the emerging part of a whole body. And out of her studio, she made a kind of a canopy draped in white rags, and it had little thin posts, and these thin posts were all wrapped in white rags, but they floated in the wind. And this whole image of these white bodies buried in the mud and those rags white rags floating in the wind was unforgettable. And you know, this was just a student project, and it's the kind of thing you see there. I've seen kids go out with shovels and do an earth sculpture. And one young man did a wonderful thing. He went around the countryside, picked up different colors of mud and clay, and did an abstract painting using his hands as paintbrushes. Did more than one abstract painting in colored muds from the area. But you know, the kids are so free up there that they just get all these wonderful ideas.
Oh, that's great.
And of course, we have the big lake and lots of nice living, and it's just delightful.
This has truly been a pleasure, and I want to thank you for your time and thank you for your thoughts.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you.